Hmm. Oops. Okay guys, so this book right here is really amazing. I've been reading it since I got it last week, and it shows both sides of the white settler story and the Indian story. This is the best book of information on it I've seen ever, really, and it's a really good book. So shout out to Dennis Crockett for making this. He was a Whitman professor here for a while, and you know, lived in Walla Walla Valley for a while and doesn't anymore, but you know, great information. Props to him, he did a great job. These books right here, you know, I've been using them, and I wasn't getting the full story of the Indians, and this gave it to me. I've tried making this video 3 different times, and it's turned out to be more than an hour of just me just reading this, and you know, that can't be. So I made some notes on it. Walla Walla is located on the Cayuse village. It mentions that in here, and everything, all these notes are referenced in here, so just letting you know. Cayuse is actually the Lixayu. That's how you are supposed to say it. The Cayuse took slaves as well. Page 14. It shows Cayuse architecture. It mentions a 156-foot long teepee tent that was housing 30 families. Indigenous people did know agriculture. Yeah, they did seasonal burns. They literally took out parts of land to accustom to their liking and stuff, and they formed the land and did growings, and they also had like horse-drawn wagons because they've had horses since 1730. The Cayuse were the first to have horses, that is noted. The Walla Walla tribes were so much more friendly, plus wealthier than other tribes. That's noted on page 23 when the historians went through the Narrows, and they met some bad Indians, but then when they came to the Walla Walla tribes, they were greeted very nicely. War sparks from theft of white goods. Yeah, there was 2 silver goblets that were stolen, and later on an Indian claimed to have found him and brought him back, and they wanted him hanged, and the chief of the Indians really didn't like that, and so they fought back, but they actually ended up scampering away, but you know, the whites just basically wanted to blame it on whoever brought it back. The Hudson Bay Company, they are a huge influence in this story. They basically took out their opposition wherever they were, influenced a bunch of people, hired people. They funded the Catholic Church and the missionaries. It's just crazy. Blanket marriages. Blanket marriages were between, were arranged marriages, mostly forced by the white settlers, and they would have blanket marriages with the young Indian women of the tribe, and they would appease, you know, tensions and stuff. So that's just crazy. And The kids from blanket marriages, when the mixed ones, they were called métis. The Hudson Bay Company doesn't want Indians around because they are seen as non-beneficial. That is noted in there. That's crazy. They only saw benefit in the Indians' horses. The Christian conversion plan plus settling along the rivers. That's, the Christians' plan to convert everyone and settle along Mill Creek and the Walla Walla River. And they did. The famous line we were taught in school, that's from when the interpreter came over to the site of, or the Indians of where the Whitman mission is. And he told them basically that goods will be brought every year after the doctor comes, and you'll be, rewarded with tools and stuff, and we'll teach you and give it to you. Never happened, but, that's what they were promised. And that's when Whitman came over. Whitman is warned of the Cayuse Indians. He was warned that they were not the friendliest with white people, and the Indians told him, like, you'll see what happens when you mess with the Cayuse. That's page 40. Whitmans going against rules plus banning natives in-house. Yeah, so they were, the Whitmans were building without asking the Indians, and the Indians really did not like that. And they were inviting a bunch of settlers over. And at this time, really, there was like 20 to 30 white settlers living in the mission and in the house. Plus, they banned natives from going inside the house. So that was because Narcissa said that there's a great deal of cleaning wherever they go. Then Narcissa talks about Catholicism taking over, which the Whitman mission, they really hated the Catholics, and the Catholics came over trying to convert the Indians over to Catholicism instead of the Christian views of Marcus Whitman and Narcissa. Then in page 52, the missions are shut down, plus Indians are anxious after Marcus Whitman left to save the farm. He left somewhere else to save his farm, and the Indians, the tensions grew because they're like, what the hell is going on? Like, why is he leaving? There's a Marcus Whitman appearance from when he is over somewhere else, and they thought he looked very poor, and he was just wearing like some beavers pelts and stuff. He lost hope in the Indians as well. On page 56, he writes a letter to his parents saying how he lost hope in the Indians, and there's no time to teach him the white settlers' ways. Then the Indians want Whitman dead for the death of Pew Pew Mox Mox's son in California. Whitman is assaulted by Tomahas. So the Indians wanted Whitman dead because there was, in California, 2 Americans killed Pew Pew Mox Mox's son. And to Pew Pew Mox Mox, he's like, okay, I need to be avenged, and basically blaming white people, but he went towards Whitman. Whitman was assaulted by Tomahas at the grain mill that Whitman had, and Tomahas was pulled off by another Indian, and basically, it's because Tomahas was thinking that Whitman was being too demanding. And then let's see. Chief Yellowbird Pew Pew Mox Mox visits his son's grave in California, plus new organic laws and no blacks allowed. So yeah, that just shows you that the new organic laws were saying that the Indians have the right to do this, but like they didn't actually. And then no blacks allowed. No blacks were allowed to settle in the Walla Walla Valley at all. The Washington Territory. Known that was not allowed. I will get into that. Hudson Bay Company credited with massive growth of area, plus new overlanders hate Indians already. So yeah, the new overlanders, they already had preset ideas about these Indians, that they were savages and they pillage and rape white settlers. That's all they do. The Indian hunters, not Indians, but the people who hunted Indians, Indian hunters slash rapists became the first Oregon settlers, plus justifying Indian Removal Act. So yeah, the Oregon settlers, the first peoples in Oregon, they went on a rampage, just pillaging all these Indian villages and raping all these women, taking slaves. And then it also mentions around here that Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, they justify it. Just making note that Dennis Crockett, he does not justify it, he just displays all the facts. So, but yeah, back in the day, they tried to justify it. There's a racist article on Indians, and Whitman supports a new movement. So yeah, you know, they were putting out a bunch of racist stuff on Indians and depicting them in a certain way. And it really was not good for the white settlers to see that, because they just already have preset ideas. And Whitman, he moved to a different religion. Chief Yellowbird Pew Pew Mox Mox's clan is super sick, plus the Catholic dioceses are established. So yeah, after Chief Yellowbird came back from California and seen his son's grave, his whole clan was super sick, and they came back to the Whitman mission. The fur trade died out, and Indians dying from epidemic, and Whitman's furious at the Catholics. Whitman was super furious, as I said. Tawatoy recommends Catholics move near Whitman's mission, plus Whitman is allegedly scared of Indians, plus rumors of poison. Telekite lost 3 kids, Feathercap loses his wife, the next day the Cayuse attacked. So yeah, see, there's a bunch of stuff happening right there before the Whitman massacre, because that, like, their loved ones were dying, they didn't know what's going on, they see all these white sailors moving in, they're like, I gotta put a stop to it. The Whitman massacre, that's when it happened. It was, you know, they came in and it started attacking. Marcus and Narcissa were killed, as well as the Sager kids and some other white settlers. And they, the Indians took a bunch of, they took 50 white settlers hostage after that. And they also forced the white women to be their slaves and, you know, raped them. And so, you know, it went both ways. But a militia of 500 set out to deal with and prevent further evil. The chiefs were scolded for for thinking that Whitman was poisoning them. And the hostages were released in exchange for goods. Indian suspects scolded, new militia of 500 men. Let's see. And then, you know, there's a story of a war. Indians attacked while moving to higher ground to they took 2 female prisoners. Militia plagued Cayuse village, and Indians burned Whitman mission buildings in retaliation, plus counsel to punish the Cayuse that raped the white hostages. So yeah, you know, a whole bunch is going on. Tensions arise after the people heard about the Whitman massacre, and they just want any Indians, you know, and the Cayuse were blamed for it. Cayuse territory is advertised as open for colonization on page 71. The 1840s California gold rush, plus people ignored the opening of Oregon. So yeah, they actually ignored the Oregon being open for settlement because people were so struck by the California gold. Cayuse remains unpunished for Whitman massacre. Miners raping and killing Indians, plus racist articles. So yeah, it talks about miners back in the day. Wherever they went, there was pillaging and rapings of Indian villages. Like, the people who got rich when they went away and mined came back rich after doing all those horrible things. They came back to their families. That's crazy. And I didn't know that. So, you know, like, eventually, like, miners would get like prostitutes here and there when it was a thing, like, later on. But No, they took Indian women. Um, the Cayuse Five, Hard Times for All Indians. The Cayuse Five was the 5 Indians that they hung for the Whitman Massacre. And it talks about the Cayuse Five trial hanging on page 77. But yeah, that is the section of the Whitman Massacre. Let's look into a little bit. Let's see. Let's go to page 67, the Whitman Massacre. So yeah, right here, I've outlined the whole thing. It was just really crazy. I do want to get more into it. I will go to the Whitman mission and see what's there, but I just want to let you guys know the real story behind everything. And yeah. So today we are at Whitman mission, and I wanted to read you guys some more excerpts from the Becoming a Walla Walla, the transformation of Cayuse country, specifically the Whitman mission part. So in 1834, the American Board of Commissioners and Foreign Missions, ABCFM, finally acted and assigned Samuel Parker, a Presbyterian minister from Ithaca, New York, to an exploring mission to Oregon. He basically came over first to the Indians and was telling them what was going to happen. So this is the part we all learned in school here. Parker explained to the Cayuse headmen, specifically Hayam Tufpan, his brother Feathercap, and brother-in-law Talokik, that a doctor would soon arrive to build a preaching house and a school on their land. I do not intend to take your lands for nothing. After the doctors come, there will come every year a big ship loaded with goods to be divided among the Indians. Those goods will not be sold but given to you. The missionaries will bring you plows and hoes to learn you how to cultivate the lands, and they will not sell but give them to you. So that was the promise that was promised to the Indians. They would be getting all this stuff, and so that's when Marcus Whitman came over. His mission came over and started here. So let's get into it. We'll walk around a little bit. Okay, so when Marcus Whitman and Narcissa Whitman, Henry and Ezra Spalding and Carpenter William Gray and Nez Perce boys Richard and John, they headed over towards this way, and due to personality clashes during the overland trek, it was decided that Spalding and Whitman would establish separate missionaries to the Clearwater. However, Whitman chose to live among the Cayuse and Frenchtown community. He was encouraged to do so by Hayam Tufpan, and against the advice of the Nez Perce, who warned, "We do not have difficulties with the white men as Cayuse do, and you will see the difference." Whitman settled on a spot at the mouth of the Mill Creek, about 25 miles from the fort. Whitman called the mission Willitpoo because it was originally the name of the Cayuse people. I also mentioned earlier in the video that Lixiu was the original name of the Cayuse people, but right here it says Willitpoo. So there's different names, but at the end they kind of sound the same. I don't know. The first house here at Willitpoo, built with the assistance of 2 Hawaiians hired at Fort Vancouver and some Frenchtown neighbors. There was Hawaiians because the Hudson Bay Company, while going through Hawaii, they took Hawaiians and used them as slaves to whatever they needed them for. So there was slaves here in the Hawaiians also in the Walla Walla Valley, as well as slaves. Whitman later delivered sermons in pseudo-Nez Perce, or with the assistance of interpreters, show that he fell short of the language requirement. Whitman either disregarded or was unaware of the fundamental promises of annual gifts made by Parker to Hayam Tufpan. Certainly, the ABCFM had no intention of carrying out such a policy. And it's a common reoccurring thing that, all these treaties were signed, but nothing was ever given to the Indians. Whitman, however, was not a traitor, and Hayam Tufpan was displeased with him from the start. After just 2 weeks, Here at Waletpu, Narcissa wrote, "The old chief Umtipi has been a savage creature in his day. His heart is still the same, full of manner of hypocrisy, deceit, and guile. He is a mortal beggar, as all Indians are. If you ask him a favor of him, sometimes it is granted or not, just as he feels. If granted, it must be well paid for. A few days ago, he took it into his head to require pay for teaching us the language and forbid his people from coming and talking with us, for fear we should learn a few words from him." So you can see there was obviously some distrust in the Indians right away. They did not really, want to teach them all their ways, because they know, they have a general sense of the white people. Contrary to their optimistic correspondents, missionary life became increasingly painful and intolerable for the Whitmans. In May 1837, with such work to be done at the missions, William Gray, who irritated everyone he met, but whose labor the Whitmans required, departed overland for New York. That fall, as the Whitmans anxiously awaited the arrival of Cayuse Halket, word reached Waletpu that he had died at Red River. In December, the Walla Walla River rose and flooded their house. A second flood in March forced Whitman to plan a move to higher ground. Whitman later wrote to the ABCFM that they would have left the mission had not the providence of God arrested him in my deliberate determination to do so by taking away our dearest child in sudden a manner of drowning. So yeah, their child was taken by drowning, and that's what made him stay, because he felt like it was a sign to him that he needed to stay. But let's walk a little bit more, and I'll read some more to you. All right, guys. So I brought you to the site of the original Marcus Whitman and Narcissa house. The foundation is still laid out right here. I don't know if it's original, but they might have redone it. But right here you can see they show a blueprint of the foundation right here. And also in this book that I was reading, it shows kind of a better depiction of it. There you go. But I'll read you some more excerpts. Unlike Whitman's first house, this new complex was far out of scale among the buildings of Frenchtown. In fact, only Fort Walla Walla, which significantly bestowed annual gifts on the headsmen, was larger. Additionally, no mention is made of Whitman requesting or being granted permission a headman to build such a structure. So yeah, he was not allowed to build this by the Indians, and it kind of made them upset. The Whitmans committed a further breach of etiquette by limiting the Cayuse access to just one room. And we read it. It's this room right here. This is the only one they were allowed to go into. The rest of them were Narcissa said they could not go in. Narcissa emphatically noted that they shall not permit them to go into the other part of the house at all. They are so filthy they make a great deal of cleaning wherever they go. The insistence that all other rooms were off limits to the Cayuse quickly led to problems. One notified of this policy, Telokite, who had succeeded Hayumtapin as the primary headman in the region, insisted that they pay him for living on his land. He quickly became a bigger threat than the despised Hayumtapin had been. Then, after more tensions and stuff, some Catholic missionaries came in trying to take the Indians away from the Whitman mission to their own place. A Catholic priest has recently been at Fort Walla Walla and held meetings with the Indians and used their influence to draw all the people away from us. Some they have forbidden to visit us again and fill all their minds with distraction about truths we teach. The conflict has begun. What trial awaits us, know not. And it's kind of crazy because the Hudson Bay Company funded the Catholics, but the Hudson actually no, I'm getting that wrong. So the ABCFM funded the Whitman mission, and the Hudson Bay Company funded the Catholics. So that's why they're feuding. By request of the Canadians of French Prairie, the Hudson Bay Company provided for the arrival of 2 Canadian priests, Francois Nobert Blanchette and Modeste Demers. And above all, the priests did not need to concern themselves with farming. They were provided for by the congregation and the HBC, and they benefited from the kinship ties of the Canadians and their indigenous wives, the ones that they forced into marriage. The scale of Whitman's complex now eclipsed Fort Walla Walla, and again there is no mention of permission for the expansion being requested of or granted from a headsman. At the same time, the Cayuse were growing disinterested in Whitman's sermons and increasingly threatening in their encounters with Whitman and Gray. Different headmen were demanding payment for the use of their land. Spalding and Smith were similarly being threatened by once friendly Nez Perce. So let's show the foundation a little bit. So this is what's left of the foundation. You can see right now I am standing in the room where the Indians were only allowed. If you think about it, it's really not a big room compared to the rest of the place. What was this, the pantry? I'm pretty sure this was the pantry to the kitchen. That's a pretty big pantry. But yeah, this is a considerably big house considering the time, the 1830s and 40s. So this right here is a drawing of the Whitmans' home here at Walletpoo in 1847. It's hard to see, but it's a pretty big complex for the time. And right here, Tolokite and Tomahas. These were 2 of the Indians that were hung for the murders here at Whitman Massacre. And I'll read more about it and get more into the story, but they were very much labeled as bad people when really they were confused and misinformed. Okay, guys, so right here I'm going to read a little bit more. So Whitman, he lost interest and hope for the Indians. Let's see. But before that, however, a letter from Boston informed Whitman and his colleagues that based on several years of troubling reports from the Whitman party, the board had decided to close both Walletpoo and Lapai missions. To recall, the Spalding, Smiths, and Grays had to have the Whitmans join the Spokane mission. The procession of overlanders flowed by the sudden departure of Whitman generated great anxiety among the Cayuse and Nez Perce. Having recorded very bad treatment from the Indians, we concluded to get away from here as soon as possible, said one of the settlers here. A few days after Whitman's departure, someone attempted to break into Narcissa's room while she slept. This led to her removal to Wascapam, which only generated more ominous rumors among the Cayuse. A few weeks later, one of Feathercap's sons burned Whitman's grist mill and grain supply, perhaps in reaction to Whitman's insistence that Indians never touch the mill. Additionally, a number of Delawares were living among the Sahapatins and relating stories of how their families have been forcibly removed from lands. In November, White set out with a group of HBC men to assert his authority on the plateau. And basically he said he represented presented 11 laws called the Nez Perce laws, and there's only 4 listed here, and they're pretty crazy, talking about how they should punish Indians if they do anything wrong. They only list 4 of them, which makes me believe that some were taken out because they were too dangerous or too crazy. Let's see. Let's move a little bit further. Oh, right here. So in 1844, Whitman wrote to his parents, "Although the Indians have made and are making rapid advance in religious knowledge and civilization, yet it cannot be hoped the time will be allowed to mature either the work of Christianization or civilization before the white settlers will demand the soil and seek the removal of both Indians and the mission. I am fully convinced that when a people refuse or neglect to fill the designs of Providence, they ought not to complain at the results. The Indians have no case obeyed the command to multiply and replenish the earth, and they cannot stand in the way of doing so." Neither Whitman nor the Cayuse demonstrated any interest in reestablishing the Indian school. Overlanders' accounts of passing through Cayuse territory mention peaceful trading for livestock, fruits, and vegetables, but also threats of isolated acts of violence. By winter of 1844, 70 whites were living here at the Whitmans farm. So let's see. The threats only increased with the arrival of about 2,500 overlanders into Oregon in 1845. That fall, Whitman was assaulted by Tomahas, a younger brother of Feathercap, and a prominent Cayuse farmer. The altercation resulted from what Tomahas perceived to be Whitman's monopolistic control of the grist mill. Tomahas was restrained by Telocac, perhaps his uncle. Whitman was far more troubled by a conversation a few weeks later with Tawatoy, who noted that whites had killed Elijah Heading and were responsible for the death of Cayuse Halkett, both his nephews, and both had been educated at white schools. He also blamed the Americans for the deaths of some of his people by either poison or infection, and accused Whitman of possessing poison. According to the Whitman, Tawatoy left the decision of abandoning Walletpu to him. And that's when Pew Pew Mox Mox went to go visit his son's grave in California, I mentioned earlier in the video when I was at home. And then right here, the laws of provisional government said, "The utmost good faith shall be observed towards the Indians. The lands and property shall never be taken from them without their consent, and in their property rights and liberty they shall never be invaded or disturbed, unless in just and lawful wars." So in just lawful wars, they mean whatever they deem reasonable to go kill Indians. Let's see. So Marcus Whitman may not have ignored the wise advice offered by people concerning about his safety and the safety of his family and guests, but he certainly moved slowly in moving on from his intensifying hostilities surrounding Walletpu. Between the summers of 1846 and 1847, the calm was due to the absence of Pew Pew Mox Mox and many Cayuse warriors. Shortly after they returned, however, the situation for everyone in the region became horrifying. After that, Pew Pew Mox Mox's men got really sick, and they came back to the Whitman mission. And after the Mexican surrender of the territory, the warriors rejoined their families and resumed plundering the region's natives. In May 1847, Pew Pew Mox Mox was given satisfactory compensation at Fort Sacramento. Let's see. Among all the Cayuse people of all ages were infected, but the disease may have not been most lethal among infants and young children. Multiple deaths occurred daily. Ultimately, the disease decimated up to 40% of the Cayuse population. And then we go on right here. Meanwhile, Whitman seems to have frantically made rounds to care for the sick among the Cayuse bands, and the Catholics made rounds to baptize and administer last rites. And then the turning point right here. Telocac lost 3 of his own children, Feathercap, who had lost 2 children, and the Methodist Mission in 1837 now lost his wife. On November 29th, after Telocac buried his 3rd child and a day after the death of Feathercap's wife, a group of about a dozen Cayuse attacked the Whitman complex. Tomas and Telokite entered Whitman's house. Tomas struck him in the head with an axe, and Telokite shot him. It is unclear whether Telokite had consented to the killing of anyone other than Whitman. Only his killing seemed to have been planned. However, those outside then began assaulting the adult American residents, Canadians, and Métis men. The Canadians and Métis men were unharmed, but it was a really bad scene. Then what happened, sorry, it's kind of getting long, but what happened was the Indians were then, after the whole massacre, they took 50 hostages of white settlers, and they took some as their wives and raped them. And the 50 settlers were eventually released after a general came down and talked to the Indians and scolded them for being stupid and believing that they were poisoned by Whitman. And a series of events went on where the Indians weren't being punished for the massacre and stuff. So what happened eventually is they told them, you better surrender the Indians or else we're gonna, do some crazy stuff. And so 5 Indians were surrendered, and that was the Cayuse 5 that was hung in Oregon City. And till their death, they said that they had no part in it, but those were the Indians that were surrendered over. It really was a crazy situation. There's a lot to be said about this, and you should go out and read it for yourself. But I just want to let you know parts of history that aren't being told, and the extra violence that is hidden from these stories around. But yeah, I'll get more into it in later videos. But thank you.